What is up, guys? Jay from A&J Reacts here. Welcome to today's video, and before we get into this, make sure you subscribe to A&J Reacts so you can be alerted whenever we upload new content which you do not want to miss for the remainder of the season. And don't forget to give this video a like. Now, for today's video, we are going to be looking into who are the favourites to go on to win the Europa League. The games are kicking off tonight. And of course, there's still a lot of detail that is not being shown, that in terms of we still don't know which teams from the Champions League are going to be dropped down into the Europa League, which is going to make it an even tougher competition to win. But however, we are looking at the current teams that are in the Europa League currently right now, and looking into it, there are only really 3 teams that are in the Europa League currently right now that I could see going all the way and even competing with some of the teams that, you know what, we're expected to drop down. And for me, them 3 teams are none other than Brighton, Roma and Liverpool. Now we're going to look through each of them teams individually. First off, we're going to be looking at Brighton. Over the last year and a half, they have been an unbelievable side to watch. A team that is just jam-packed full of quality and has made some very intelligent investments over the years, bringing in players from the cheap, and then some of which have gone on to have 5 or even 10 times their market value from what they originally bought for. Like we've seen in the transfer window just past, how much McAllister and Caicedo went for, even though they got bought in very cheap at the time when they came in. And even now, they've still got a phenomenal team. And they're playing out of their skin at the minute in the Premier League. They are currently sitting in the top 6. Been unbelievable throughout, got some great results. And even though they've lost the likes of McAllister and Caicedo, they have still been bringing in such smart investments. Their scouts have been recruiting some top players that are coming in you wouldn't think are going to do that well, just down to the price tag itself and the fact that you've never heard of most of these players that they brought in, but then they turn out to be absolute quality players. And I feel that for them, winning the Europa League would be an amazing achievement, considering how much they have not won in the past. And also, it's going to be a tougher ask, I think, to get into the top 4 for them this season, due to some of the teams coming back, the likes of Liverpool, Arsenal and Man City is still going to be there, and you have Newcastle that are thrown into the mix as well. I feel that for them, going for the Europa League will probably be their best chance of getting into the Champions League next year. And not to mention, they will be winning a European trophy, which will be huge for the club. They are definitely got to be contenders to go on to win the Europa League. And then next up, we have Roma. Obviously, had a poor start to the season in their first 3 games, and then bounced back, winning 7-0 against Empoli. Just goals galore in that match. And they're still coached under the legendary Jose Mourinho. And they were last year's Europa League finalists, getting knocked out narrowly on penalties by Sevilla. And their team, you just look at it, like their initial 11, and then the depth that they have on the bench as well. And when you have players of the likes of Dybala, who has made a Champions League final and competed in Champions League, Pellegrini, who is one of Italy's best midfielders. Still got the likes of Tammy Abraham in there, who's an English international. And then this season bringing in the likes of Paredes, Aouar, Renato Sanchez. They have got a solid team. Midfield through to the attack, and their defence as well is pucker. Like, you cannot complain too much about their team itself. And even though at the start of the season, they were in the running for the Champions League football in Serie A, but considering how poor they're, it's still very early on, but they've had a poor season. It's probably altered people's opinions on where they were going to finish. But after their performance against Empoli, that sort of match will probably give the players all the world of confidence. And I feel Same situation as Brighton. It is probably going to be tougher for them to get Champions League through the league than it would be going all the way in the Europa League. So I feel for Roma, especially after how it ended last season for them, losing in the final, which was heartbreaking. Mourinho losing his first ever European final. I feel that they probably have it in the back of their minds that they have a score to settle in this competition. That it didn't go their way last year and that they want to try and do it again this year. And I feel that that is probably one of, if not the main goals for Roma this season, which is to go on to win the Europa League. And then the season prior to them making the final, Conference League champions. So they are going on a rampage to try and pick up European silverware, and they have been very successful in Europe over the last 2 seasons. So Roma, definitely a team to watch out for in the Europa League. And then going on to my third pick, which is Liverpool. Very experienced players. They have former Champions League winners in this team, and they're coming off their worst season that they have had in years last year, missing out on Champions League football, getting knocked out early in the Champions League round of 16, and they're in a bit of a transitional period at the minute, losing out quite a few players, getting rid of quite a few players. Their midfield is completely different to what it was last year, and obviously they still have some issues in terms of, you know, the likes of Trent defensively not being that up to par. Their defence itself hasn't been on top of their game, and their midfield at times does seem overrun. But even with all these issues, they have still managed to remain unbeaten in the league, and they are in a Champions League battle at the minute. And at the start of the season, that was my prediction for them. But the thing is with Liverpool, I don't know whether or not they have the depth to compete on both fronts of getting top 4 in the Premier League and then going on to try and win the Europa League. I feel for Liverpool that their goal most probably might be trying to get top 4 in the Champions League, just due to the fact that also financially for them is a bigger accomplishment to get top 4 than it would be to win the Europa League, just on a financial basis. And the fact that I don't think that they have got the depth, good enough depth to compete on both sides, I feel. And for that reason, I would just miss out on Liverpool going all the way. And then especially when you're getting all the top teams that are dropping down from the Champions League, it's going to be a much tougher test. They don't have the depth in the midfield, and if they're rotating Van Dijk, their defence, particularly in the centre, is going to be a hell of a lot more vulnerable. And we've already seen defensive issues from Trent. And then not to mention, up top, they're lacking a bit of depth at times. If you were to rotate an entire front three, the front three they would have to replace that, it wouldn't be good enough to even compete on the Europa League standard. So I would probably just push Liverpool to the side in this regard, and I probably would not have them as my favourites. But when you put everything into the equation and you look at the current scenario, I feel Brighton at this moment in time are probably my favourites to go on to win the Europa League this year, just out of all the teams we have right now, because it all depends as well who is going to drop down from the Champions League groups. And if you got the likes of, you know, Newcastle, you got the likes of Sevilla or PSV, Union Berlin dropping down, it's going to be a much tougher test. And then maybe after, when all the European groups have been determined, we can actually look into this with a proper analysis. But for me, I would say Brighton, as of right now, have got the better team, and they have got, aside from Mourinho, the best coach in Europa League right now. And I mean, obviously, Jurgen Klopp. But in terms of right now, De Zerbi and his players are going to be hungry for this. They are hungry for success. And they've done so well over the last few years. But if they play in the Europa League like they do in the Premier League and rotate just a little bit and get some other youngsters into there and make a big name for themselves, it's going to look very promising for Brighton. So I have Brighton as favourites, and then I will put Roma are just behind that. Roma are just behind that because they have got an unbelievable squad as well. But Brighton just edge it for me, and that is my personal opinion on who I think is the current Europa League favourites.